This podcast has been brought to you by Seeker's Guidance, the Global Islamic Seminary. Help us spread the light of prophetic guidance to millions around the world by becoming a monthly supporter. Make a small donation at seekersguidance.org/donate. For as little as $10 a month, you can help people find life-changing guidance.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I pray that all of you are doing well, inshallah. This is our podcast on parents, our honorable parents, and your path to paradise. This is your brother Yamin Niyazi now for another episode. In this episode, we're continuing on the poem. We're still in the introduction of the great scholar's work, Imam Muhammad Mawlud, so we're going to jump right in. Last session, we left off on a line when, and as you recall, inshallah, in the previous lessons, we are reading some of the lines from the great scholar Muhammad Mawlud, and we're speaking about their different meanings. So therefore, we are on the lines, thereafter, since whoever guides to goodness is like the one who actually performs the good, and for this all praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So on this, we want to bring the following point, that there's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that I believe we mentioned last time, Man dalla ala al-khayri kafa'ilihi. The one who guides to a good is like the one who did it. And, we mentioned, I believe last time, about the incredible mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that every time someone calls someone to Islam, someone reminds someone to pray, someone encourages someone to fast or even give $5 even in charity, any act of goodness by which a Muslim encourages another to do, right, to perform, you get the same reward. So by this, Muhammad Mawlud again is basically saying that he wants to get that reward. He wants to remind people of the rights of parents. And if they act upon it, he's going to get the full reward. And believe me, we are all in need of the mercy of Allah and His rewards. And he continues by saying, وَأَوْجَبَ الْبِرَّ عَلَى الْأَعْيَانِ بِالْجَمْعِ وَالسُنَّةِ وَالْقُرْآنِ. Allah has made fulfilling the rights of parents incumbent upon everyone. In other words, Allah has made to honor, respect, and give the rights of parents a wajib. Wajib is something that every Muslim must do. It's an individual responsibility. If you perform a wajib, you get reward. If you don't do it, you basically commit a sin. That's one way we can look at it in a simple definition. He says that basically this is established in the Quran, the Sunnah, and Ijma. So what are these? As Muslims, we should know that the first primary source by which we derive our law from is the Quran. And if something is clearly in the Quran, then the teaching is very clear. There's no need for secondary or other sources of law. However, here, what we're saying is, yes, if it's clear in the Quran, then that's it. There's the injunction. That's the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then if it's in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because that's the sunnah. So we have, let's say we're given a command to pray, or we're given a command to be good to our parents. You'll find those primary verses in the Quran. And then after that, you'll also find them in the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and what we call the hadith, which are his statements, his sayings, his words. That's the hadith, that's the sunnah. And then you have bi ijma. What is ijma? This might be a word you haven't heard before. It means consensus. Consensus is the agreement of all of the Muslim scholars of one period of time on a matter. The opinion of the great scholars of law on a matter in one time, where they all agreed on a matter, that becomes ijma, consensus. Why is that important? Why are we mentioning it? Because every Muslim really needs to know that this is a source of law for us. We just don't have, as Muslims, the Quran and the Sunnah. We also have ijma. And ijma is where, when the consensus occurs, this becomes binding upon Muslims to follow. There's no option therein, right? This is an accepted practice, it's obligatory to adhere to it. And so, why is that? What's the proof for us? The hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, salawatullahi rabbi wa salamuhu alayhi, which he says, my ummah will not agree upon error. My ummah will not gather or agree upon error. And this means that the ummah is the great Muslim nation of our scholars throughout the generations, especially the first generation. They have all been protected divinely by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not individually, but collectively. In other words, a single scholar can technically, in our Aqidah we believe, they could make a mistake. Even though they gave their best effort, they can do what is called ijtihad, right? Coming up with their own juridical opinions that, they arrived at a certain thing being halal or haram or makruh, and they give a fatwa, they give a legal verdict, they give an opinion. Let's say, in my opinion, this is haram. Now, they did their best reasoning. They looked in the entire Quran, they looked in the entire Sunnah, and they found that, look, this to me is haram, right? There could be scholars like that. This is a very, very high-ranking scholar, but he could still be wrong. But now, when all of the scholars come together and agree upon something, with no one being different than that, in other words, they unanimously hold an opinion, what the Prophet Muhammad is telling us here is that my ummah will not gather upon error. So this will be something that is from the divine. So when the entire ummah agrees, it means Allah is pleased with it and they didn't agree upon error. If there's disagreement, it doesn't mean that one scholar is wrong over the other, but they did their best to come up with the correct opinion. Of course, the opinions or ijtihads of the scholars, this is something important to know as well, especially for younger Muslims, is if they are mujtahid mutlaq, if they're an absolute scholar that can derive their own laws, which is a very high-ranking level, then they come up with an opinion. If their opinion is wrong, they'll still be rewarded by Allah, and people who follow them will not be at fault. If they were correct, then they'll get 2 rewards on the Day of Judgment. So as the hadith mentions, if they're wrong, they get 1 reward. If they're right, they get 2 rewards. But if you try to come up with your own opinion, and you're not a scholar, you're not going to get a single reward. Even if you were right, actually, you still get sin because you were not qualified to answer that kind of question. This is not something like somebody comes up to you and says, hey, how many rakats is dhuhr? And you're like, I'm not a scholar. No, it's not talking about that. But it's basically saying, well, when you come out from ruku', should you raise your hands? And when you say Sami Allahu liman hamida, what they call Rafa al-Yadayn, or should we not? And a person says yes or no, and I think this or that because of the hadith of this and that. That is not allowed for an average Muslim to do, and that's prohibited. And anyone who thinks otherwise has still got some ways to go in learning. So now when he says وَأَوْجَبْ الْبِرَّ عَلَى الْأَعْيَانِ. So another thing to break down here that he brings it up is the idea of fard ayn. What is fard ayn? And what is another? So there are 2 types of fard. And these fard means obligations. They're just different categories, but they really mean the same thing, which is an obligation. But there are in Islam individual obligations, which each and every one of us must perform individually, like the prayer or fasting. These are called fard ayn. You have to do them yourself. You can't pay somebody to pray for you or to fast for you. You yourself have to do it. And then there are things that every single Muslim all across the board, no matter where they live, what language they speak, must learn what breaks wudu, what doesn't break wudu, how to pray, what are the things that break the prayer, and about fasting and zakat and all those things that pertain to your lives. That's called fard ayn. Then there is what is called a communal obligation, in English individual obligation, and communal obligation, which in Arabic is called fard kifaya. Now fard kifaya is where it's a communal obligation, so if some of the people in the community do it, the obligation is lifted from the rest of the community. And the people that do perform a fard kifaya, communal obligation, then they get the reward of all of those who would have performed it. So they fulfill a great role, a great responsibility, and that they take everyone else out of sin. Because by definition, the scholars say if no one fulfilled a certain fard kifaya that they were supposed to do as a community, if no one did it, then the entire community is at sin. The entire community is at fault. The entire community could be held accountable by Allah. Walayadu billah. So now you might wonder, well, what's an example of fard kifaya? Like memorizing the Quran. Memorizing the Quran is a communal obligation upon the entire Muslim nation. In other words, if no Muslim remained alive who memorized the Quran, then the entire ummah is committing a sin. So we must always have people who memorize the Quran. We have to have scholars. That's a fard kifaya for the community of the Muslims to produce scholars. Whoever can become a scholar and whoever supports those kind of scholars, they'll get the full reward of being a scholar. Or janazah prayer, that's one that happens a lot. The funeral prayer, if a Muslim dies, there's a specific way of funeral rites. If no one does it in a community, then everyone is held accountable and everyone is committed a sin. So being good to your parents is an individual obligation. And it's something every Muslim should know. And also every Muslim should know that what we call uquq al-walidain, which is, inshallah we'll define it, basically disobedience to the parents, that this is haram. This is haram by consensus, and meaning every Muslim has agreed, all the scholars have agreed, and it's very serious. My advice to a lot of young people is whenever the scholars have all agreed upon a thing, be careful to go against it. You're going to be in trouble. And also the things to avoid the most first is obviously major sins, but that which the entire ummah has agreed upon that it is haram. Therefore, those are the things you want to prioritize if you are going to try to not fall into the pitfalls of sins, thereby risking your own salvation, your own success in the next world. So may Allah protect us from this. Ameen. Now in the Sunnah, so in the Quran it is made wajib, in the Sunnah. Where is it in the Sunnah? There's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ where the Prophet asked the companions, shall I not tell you of the worst of the major sins? Should I not inform you? They said, yes, Ya Rasulullah. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, associating partners with Allah. What do we call that in Arabic? Shirk. Associating partners with Allah is the worst. So he said, associating partners with Allah and uquq al-walidain, which uquq al-walidain means disrespecting or not fulfilling the rights of the parents. While obviously birr al-walidain would be the opposite of that. So to disrespect them, not fulfill their rights, is gross negligence, and it's called uquq al-walidain. So notice something that the scholars have brought up here, okay? The scholars have brought up that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this hadith, he seconds the first statement where he said the major sins are shirk, associating partners with Allah, and uquq al-walidain, disrespect or disobedience of parents. He linked them together. Just like when I mentioned in the previous lessons or episodes, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah has declared that you worship none but Him and you show excellence towards your parents. Here the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is telling us that the worst of the major sins is shirk, associating partners with Allah, that will basically, a'udhu billah, expel you from paradise. And then he named it as the second, disobedience to the parents. When something like that is brought together and coupled in the Quran, this means it is extremely dangerous. It is a massively big sin. Now, what is this uquq? Apart from disrespect and not fulfilling their rights, it's really to enrage them, to hurt them, to disrespect them where you make them angry or you make them disappointed, or you don't fulfill something they wanted that you do, and then that gets them upset. We're going to go into that more when we cover the section that'll deal with disobedience to the parents and the limits of it. But for now, we're just continuing in the lines as we read on. So, again, that's the proof from the Sunnah. And we've already mentioned some proofs from the Quran itself. Then he says in his lines, أردت أن أرشد بعض النبلاء إذ عن حقيقة البرور سألا. I wanted to guide some of the intelligent people, for I have been asked about the reality of burur, which is what? From bir. The plural of it, burur, is to do, perform excellent. You can say be at excellence with your parents, to do everything in the most excellent way. Now, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he also mentioned that Allah is in the assistance of a slave as long as that slave is in assistance of his brother. Now, this aun in Arabic, Allah, in other words, you can say this. Maybe that's a little confusing. Let me give another translation. Allah will always help you so as long as you always help your brother. Okay, I want to repeat that. Allah will always help you so as long as you help your brother. And obviously, if you're sisters, that means your sister. When I say brothers and sisters in humanity and faith, in particular, being Muslim, so as long as you're helping them, Allah will help them. You feed them, Allah will feed you. You clothe them, Allah will clothe you on the Day of Judgment. Everything you want, essentially, that you would like for yourself, you do for others. If you want Allah to forgive you, forgive others. If you want to be near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be good to His creation. And this leads us to the next hadith. Al-khalqu kulluhum iyarullah. All creatures are the dependents of Allah. Wa habbuhum ila Allah, and the most beloved of them to Allah, anfa'uhum li'iyalihi, are those who are most beneficial to His dependents. So in other words, the entire creation, we're dependent upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who are the ones that Allah loves the most? Those that are most beneficial to humanity. And in this regard, I want to read something or mention something from the great scholar Imam al-Haddad, one of the great Yemeni saints and scholars of several hundred years ago. He mentioned that if you want to do the action that is the most beloved and the most beneficial to all of humanity, is da'wah ila Allah, calling others to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making da'wah. Or, it's the English word, right? Performing da'wah, doing da'wah. Da'wah in Arabic means to invite. So we have to call others to Islam. We have to invite others to Islam. If you call others to Islam, which is not just by words, going up to them, hey, have you heard about Islam? Do you want to convert? Nothing like that necessarily. It's your good actions, it's your good character, it's your good behavior, it's you coming through for them. It's you assisting your neighbor maybe when they need something, right? It's helping others, it's feeding them, it's clothing them, it's caring about them, it's wanting good for them, and they can feel that and see that, and then they're impressed. Well, whoa, that's Islam, that's what Islam does for others. Maybe I should try Islam. There's another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says, hearts are drawn to those who show excellence towards them. So those that do good for you, your heart, like it connects to others. Anybody who brings you a present and helps you out on an afternoon or does something good for you, you're inclined to love them. You really appreciate it. And sometimes you may never forget it for the rest of your life. Like, this person helped me with something when I really needed it, I'll never forget. And you'll always love them. That's the nature of the human being, right? And so now let's continue. There's some other points that he brings up in the commentary that's also important. And one is about knowledge, right? Because he said that on burur they asked about burur. Now he says, because they asked, there's a good point to add here, that in Islam, when you're asked about something and you know the knowledge of it, it is haram to hide knowledge. It is haram to hide knowledge. Okay? What do we mean by this? We mean that There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that best explains this. Whoever is asked about something they know and then conceals it, Allah will bridle them with the rain of fire on the day of resurrection. Walayadu billah. What does that mean? That means somebody asks you, for example, I need to pray dhuhr. I don't know how to pray. Is it 3 rakats or 4? Can you help me? And you know the answer and you stay quiet. Why? For whatever reason. Maybe you just don't feel like answering. Maybe you feel like, hey, I'm not a scholar. But you know it for sure. And you hide that knowledge from them, that is haram. So to hide knowledge is haram. That's why he's saying that he's responding to those who asked about bir. Because once you're asked, you got to answer. Right? So he says, فَجِئْتُ فِي جَوَابِهِ بِرَجَزِي. So I answered that with a abridged didactic poem. What does that mean? And he says that covers most of the important matters. So he said, okay, you're asking me about burur, you're asking me about birrul walidain. Okay, here I am. I'm going to answer you, but I'm going to answer in didactic poem so that it is easy to memorize. And so this is one of the things that scholars do, right? They, in the past, especially in West Africa, they like to write poems that is written in a way that is easy to memorize, right? They rhyme, right? Most of this entire poem, there's always rhymes. And so that rhyming helps you to memorize. And sometimes in West Africa, they also read it in a certain tone, right? They read it in a certain tone. One of my teachers, blessed teacher, may Allah bless him, he would read lines of poetry and trying to memorize, but I always noticed that he does it in a certain tone. The tone would help you memorize things, right? And I've tried it myself. You can try it at home, as they say. Sometimes they say, don't try this at home. This is something you can try at home, right? And you'd have to get some lines and then you just basically go at it. For example, this one you might read, فَجِئْتُ فِي جَوَابِهِ بِرَجَزِي وَفٍ بِمُعْظَمِ الْأَهَمِّ مُوجَزِي سميتها ظفر بالمراد في بر بالآباء والأجداد. And then you keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, kind of reading it like that. And then that tone and reading it several hundred times was a tool that they would use in memorizing the entire poem. Okay? So let's continue on. He says, I have named it the attainment of what is sought in regards to bir of the parents and grandparents. And if you wish, you may call it success of the 2 abodes through bir of the parents, and Allah is oft forgiving. So this is what he's named it. And in simple English, we've called it the rights of parents. So then he says, O you who have asked. So now we're going back into his lines of Muhammad Mawlud. He says, Ya sa'ila an birril walidayka, labbayka ya sa'ilu ma'a sa'adayka. O you who have asked about bir of the parents, I have answered you, O questioner, and brought help. So what is he bringing? Now, one of the things that it says is that sometimes people ask with words, and sometimes actually people are asking by what they call in Arabic lisan al-hal. This is a really cool concept in Islam and in Arabic, lisan al-hal. Now, lisan al-hal is something that one's outward state expresses a statement. Something about the outward of something expresses a statement, but that statement is not by words. It's expressed by meaning, right? It's expressed by, I remember one of my teachers once mentioned people that were really crazy about climbing really dangerous mountains, right? Rock climbing and climbing without ropes, without gear, and then they just climb by itself and then they slip and fall and die, God forbid. And he said, why do people do that? The mountain has what is called lisan al-hal. It's saying, don't mess with me. Dangerous mountains are saying, like, don't mess with me. Are they actually speaking that? No, but That's the state that it's expressing. So this lisan al-hal, what he's saying is that, like if you see someone poor and they're homeless, they're without a home, they're without shelter, and you look at their state and you see that they're impoverished, they look hungry, they look thirsty, their lips are dry, their stomach is really small, and they just, look like they need help. And sometimes you can have a bigger stomach, still be hungry. That's just I'm giving you by way of example. So then, does a person like that need to come up to you and say, oh, I'm so hungry, can you please help me? No. Their hal, their outward expresses a statement, which is basically, I am hungry, please feed me, right? And so the state of the ummah at the time of Sayyidina Shaykh Muhammad Mawlud, rahimahullah ta'ala, was that people's outward expression and their behavior and their akhlaq and their character was basically begging for guidance related to the rights of parents. Our time is even more expressive of this. What do we mean by that? That our time now is screaming, please guide and help me concerning the rights of parents. This is the lisan al-hal of our time. What do we need to do? We need to address it. We need to speak about it. We need to cover those important aspects related to it so we can free ourselves from ignorance. The true enemy of mankind is ignorance. The downfall of this ummah has always been in ignorance. The thing that will raise the ummah, save the ummah, rescue the ummah is knowledge. Knowledge is the key to every good. In fact, there's a statement here from basically one of the books that the knowledgeable one is alive, infinitely living after his death. Even while under the dirt, his remains become dust. The ignorant one is dead. As he walks upon the earth, he is counted from the living, yet he is in non-existence. So this is covering the idea that people whose knowledge the ummah benefit from are in reality alive. People that are alive but they don't offer anything of guidance, of knowledge, of life and iman and faith, they're in reality dead, even if they're walking on the earth. That's the truth. Okay? So then he says, take the completion of the answer in this versified form. Come to righteousness, O son of my mother, yabna ummah. And that could be either, we're all related to Adam and Eve. So they're in reality our parents, our grandparents. So in that way, we're all brothers and sisters. Or it can also mean just, it's an endearing term in the Arabic language. Now, couple of things about memorizing. Should someone listening to this be so, encouraged and finds great high aspirations of that of the righteous of our early times, they decide, hey, I'm going to memorize this. What's the point of memorization? What are some benefits? Number one of the most important points of memorization is it preserves knowledge. Okay, it preserves knowledge. Number two, it's always at hand. Whenever you need it, you can always recite and get the answer. I remember once I asked dear Sheikh Rami Ansur, the translator of this book, I was with him. I asked him a question in fiqh and he didn't know it. He said, wait, let me look for it. And I was standing there looking at him. Okay, what's he going to look for? I don't see a book around. I don't see paper. There was no phones, really. I mean, smartphones weren't even out. This was probably in 2003 or so. And he said, let me look for it. And I said, okay. So he's just quiet. And then he starts reciting poetry in his head. I can kind of hear it on his lips, very low. And he says, the answer is this. No, we don't have it. We only have it in 2 cases. And then he gave me those. I said, where'd you get that from? He said, it's in the text that I had memorized. Right there. Knowledge is right at hand. You didn't need to look for it. And that's another benefit of memorizing. Why memorize? Because your knowledge will always be with you. Imam al-Shafi'i, radiallahu anhu, one of our greatest scholars, said, my knowledge is always with me. If I'm in the marketplace, it's with me. If I'm at home, it's with me. No matter where I am, where I go, it's always with me. And one other great scholar, I think it was Imam al-Ghazali, somebody tried to rob him of his books at a younger age. And when he was about to take everything, that he told the robbers, these highway brigands, that, basically take everything but don't take my knowledge. And take everything but don't take my knowledge. He was referring to his books. But then this robber basically looked at him and said, what kind of knowledge is it that a thief like me can steal it? And he felt that Allah made that person, like basically it was a message from God to him. And then after that, he said he memorized everything and his knowledge was always with him. And I constantly see my teacher all the time. He's just running things in his head. He's touching his fingers and counting certain things. If you don't repeat and repeat and repeat, like we repeat Fatiha every day. Imagine, God forbid, we don't read Fatiha for a few years. Imagine not being able to recite Fatiha because you're rusty. Or here's a better example, maybe for some of us, is Ayatul Kursi every night that we should read before we go to bed and after every prayer. So by reciting and all the time keeping up with it, you make sure that you don't lose it and it's always with you. And another thing is that slow memorization and slow learning lets knowledge penetrate. Sometimes people get in these crazy programs, 2-month intensive. They want to learn everything. It's 2-month intensive, 1 month intensive, a weekend intensive. There's always intensive. And those are fine because they're very beneficial for sure. No one's saying they're not. But like if all of your life becomes intensive, and then when you take little knowledge at a time, let that sink in. Let me give you an example. Surah Al-Baqarah, one of the great companions, I think it was Ibn Umar, took him 7 years to memorize it. 7 years. Now these days, there's people that have memorized Surah Al-Baqarah, and I think in less than a week, right? 286 verses in less than a week. But how did some of these companions memorize it? Not in a rush, little by little, living it, putting into their life, putting it in practice, and then implementing it, memorizing it, reciting it. And unfortunately, that's changed in our time. So people's always intensive, rush. Then when you ask a question or you want to cover something, I can't remember it. I did study it. You hear that a lot. I know you do. Where somebody says, I studied it, I can't remember it. That's our state. May Allah forgive us. It also kind of validates what level you're at, right? By memorization. So you memorize a lot of things. That shows the amount of work you put in. Ultimately, what's the difference between someone who has knowledge and someone doesn't? If they need their books in order to read and learn, they're stranded in the desert. What's the difference between the two? If one needs his books to figure out the rules of prayer, what to recite, the Quran, everything else, then that's not real knowledge, right? But what it does is with memorization and a lot of it, that kind of shows your level and kind of stamps where you're at. And that also shows hard work, right? So that's maybe not for us, but this is to encourage some of you to get in the habit of a little bit of memorization. It's good for the mind. Another good thing about memorization is that it helps you to let me start over. With memorization, what it does is it helps to keep the rulings of God always handy. So you're in a situation where somebody's asking you about someone and they might say something about them that's backbiting. And then you're like, is this a case that they can backbite or not? Because they're asking me a question. I can't remember. But if you were to memorize lines about that and say, well, in this case, actually, it is allowed. So I remembered. That's the benefit. Or like what I said about the story of Sheikh Rami reciting to me from memory, and then you figure out the ruling right there. That's another benefit. And there are many, many other benefits to it. We'll continue. And now I wanted to actually also say something about great memories. Our tradition of Islam has always been built on, preserved, we should say, by scholars of impeccable and incredible memory. Let's take, for example, Imam al-Bukhari. Imam al-Bukhari had an incredible photographic memory, more than we can imagine. He could hear 100 hadith in different orders one time, memorize it all, and repeat it in the correct order and actually correct it. This is a story, it's a longer story I won't go into. Those scholars, they would hear hundreds and hundreds of traditions and they were able to maintain its memorization. How was that? It was done through taqwa, because they were so upright, because they had such great levels of piety. Memorization became a gift to them from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. If you have taqwa of Allah, Allah will teach you. So what is taqwa? To be in line with God's demands, His mandates. If you can do that, then you'll always be, inshallah, on the right path. Right? Allah will make it easy for you. And so if you don't, then you'll suffer. And there's some lines of poetry by Imam Shafi's teacher, Imam al-Waqi', where Imam Shafi went up to him and complained about his weak memory. And then Imam al-Waqi' told him that knowledge is a light that Allah doesn't give to those who are asi, disobedient. Knowledge is a light, and Allah doesn't give that light to someone who is disobedient. So if we want our memories to increase and be better, one, put in the time, but two, don't disobey Allah. The more you are upright, the more you're a strong Muslim, the more everything will become easy for you. There's verses about that. Whoever has taqwa of Allah, Allah makes their affairs easy. Whoever has taqwa of Allah, Allah will raise their rewards. Whoever has taqwa of Allah, Allah will give him a way out. All of that is from the fruits of taqwa. Min thamarati taqwa. What is it? Strong memory, a way out, provision from where you didn't know, an increase in good rewards. All this khair comes from what? Taqwa. So inshallah, in our next session, as we'll keep these brief, I'm trying to keep them right at about 30 minutes. Inshallah, we're going to speak about what does birr entail in speech, right? And we're going to go into the categories of birr, because he's going to cover birr, righteousness to parents, as it deals with speech, related also as it deals with the heart, with the body, and with wealth. In all of these four things, speech, heart, body, and wealth, there is a response and rules related to it concerning parents. So inshallah, next time we will delve into birr in speech. Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah bless you all. Inshallah. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was brought to you by Seeker's Guidance, the Global Islamic Seminary. Visit seekersguidance.org to access reliable Islamic knowledge taught by qualified teachers. We offer a wide range of courses, podcasts, articles, and a world-class answer service. Support us in spreading free, reliable Islamic knowledge to millions around the world by becoming a monthly supporter. Visit seekersguidance.org/donate and make a small monthly commitment today. Our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Whoever guides someone to goodness will have a similar reward." So don't forget to share this podcast and spread prophetic guidance.